All right, ladies and gentlemen, here we go with chapter 28. And here is our outline. We've got 7 sections, and we'll start with the first one here. And that is your focus question. With the jobless recovery in the Iraq War harming Bush's popularity, in 2004, the Democrats thought they could retake the White House. They nominated as their candidate John Kerry, a Massachusetts senator and decorated Vietnam combat veteran who had joined the anti-war movement. But Kerry proved ineffective, lacking charisma, and unable to generate enthusiasm. Bush won only narrowly with a margin of 2% of the popular vote and by only 34 electoral votes. At his second inaugural address, Bush promised to use American power to end tyranny in the world and again repetitively invoked freedom and America's mission to spread it throughout the world. Republicans were overjoyed by Bush's triumph, but continuing chaos in Iraq, coupled with corruption scandals among Republicans in Congress and the White House, eroded Bush's standing. Vice President Dick Cheney's chief of staff was convicted of perjury in connection with an investigation of the illegal leak to the press of the name of a CIA operative whose husband had criticized the manipulation of intelligence before the Iraq invasion. He was the first White House official to be indicted while holding office since 1875. Bush's popularity declined steadily, falling to 31% by 2006. The Bush administration suffered another blow in August 2005 when Hurricane Katrina devastated New Orleans. Located below sea level, New Orleans is vulnerable to flooding, and despite scientists' warnings, the levee system had not been reinforced by the federal government. The levees broke when the storm hit on August 29th, and nearly the entire city, with a population of 500,000, was flooded. Nearby areas of the Louisiana and Mississippi Gulf Coast were also hard hit. This natural disaster was quickly compounded by mistakes made at all levels of government. The mayor had ordered evacuations too late and not provided for those who were unable to leave the city. The Federal Emergency Management Administration, or FEMA, had done almost nothing to prepare for it. President Bush seemed unaware of the devastation and unable to do anything about it. For days, thousands of people, mostly poor African Americans, were abandoned in the floodwaters. Government officials seemed unaware that thousands were still in the city and without food, water, or shelter. Bodies floated in the streets and people died in city hospitals and nursing homes. When aid started arriving, the storm had caused $80 billion in damage, killed 1,500 people, and displaced 2/3 of the city's population. The storm made Americans aware once more of the extent of poverty in the world's richest nation. Decades of state and local policies of pursuing economic growth through low-wage, non-union employment and low investment in education, health, and social welfare had produced a large poor population in the South. Nearly 30% of New Orleans' population lived in poverty. The attacks of September 11th and subsequent war on terror threw into sharp relief the status of American borders and borderlands, especially in the Southwest. The existence of a borderland with strong community ties in both the United States and Mexico has always been a source of tension. Fears of terrorists crossing the border merged with older worries of undocumented immigrants and the growth of Hispanic culture. The Bush and Obama administrations greatly accelerated efforts to police the border. Latino communities experienced the Southwest borderlands as increasingly militarized, while some Americans claimed that the American government was not doing enough to enforce the border. Ironically, the result was tighter controls over back-and-forth migration. While many immigrants had traveled freely across the border in the past, now more immigrants simply stayed put. In early 2006, the debate over immigration exploded. The immigration reforms of 1965 had dramatically transformed immigration patterns, and especially contributed to the rapid growth of the Hispanic population, and immigration grew in the first years of the 21st century. Many new immigrants bypassed the major cities and moved into small cities and towns in the Midwest, New England, and the Upper South. Racial and ethnic diversity was now a fact of life in the American heartland. Undocumented newcomers, mostly from Mexico, also came to the United States. By 2005, it was estimated that 11 million illegal aliens were in the country, with 7 million of them in the workforce. Economists disagree about their impact. While it seems clear that large numbers of uneducated and low-skilled workers push down wages at the bottom of the labor market, on the other hand, both legal and illegal immigrants spend money, pay taxes, and work at jobs for which American workers seem unavailable, given the low wages. Some analysts estimate that 1/5 of all construction workers, domestic workers, and agricultural workers are in the United States illegally. By 2006, with many Americans convinced that the United States had lost control of its borders, the House of Representatives approved a bill making it a felony to be in the United States illegally and a crime to offer aid to illegal immigrants. The bill sparked a massive series of demonstrations in the spring of 2006 by hundreds of thousands of legal and illegal immigrants and their allies, demanding the right for illegal migrants to remain in the country as citizens. The immigration issue was at a stalemate where it remains today. As in the two previous decades, conservatives were far better at implementing their economic and foreign policy than implementing their cultural views. Supreme Court rulings in 2003 showed how the social revolution wrought by the 1960s was not going to be undone. Ruling on challenges to the University of Michigan's admissions policies, the court upheld the right of colleges and universities to take race into account in admissions decisions, arguing that these institutions had a legitimate interest in creating diverse student bodies to enhance education. The Bush administration had encouraged the court to reject affirmative action. In a second decision in Lawrence versus Texas, the court struck down a Texas law that made homosexual acts a crime, paving the way for the 2015 Obergefell versus Hodges ruling, overturning state laws barring marriages for same-sex couples. In 2003, two-thirds of Americans opposed legalizing gay marriage, but by the time of the 2015 ruling, 60% were in favor. The decision supported movements' campaigns to extend freedom into personal life and repudiated conservative views that constitutional interpretation must rest on the Founding Fathers' original intent or a narrow reading of the document. Instead, the Constitution was a living document whose protections expanded as society changes. The Iraq War, the Hurricane Katrina disaster, and scandals in Congress provoked widespread public discontent in 2006, and that year Democrats won major gains in congressional elections. Voters repudiating the administration gave Democrats control of both houses of Congress for the first time since 1994. In 2007, Nancy Pelosi of California became the first female Speaker of the House in American history. In January of 2009, when Bush left office, only 22% of Americans approved of his performance in office, the lowest figure since these polls began in the mid-20th century. It was difficult to see many achievements in Bush's 8 years. His foreign policy had alienated much of the world and left the United States militarily weakened and diplomatically isolated. His tax cuts for the wealthy and the cost of the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan had transformed budget surpluses into enormous deficits. His reforms on immigration and Social Security went nowhere, and the number of Americans living in poverty and those without health insurance rose during his term. So, that'll be the end of our first section. We'll be back for the second.